Good morning, good afternoon, or if y'all happen to watch this later on, good evening. We've got a special guest with us today. I'm very glad to have him. We've got another Hatchet Force man with us today, Mr. Gamble Dick. First off, before I hand it over to him and let him get started, Mr. Gamble does have a wonderful, wonderful biography out. It's one of the better, in my opinion. It's a full Hatchet Force, but it also deals with recon situation and is, in my opinion, one of the better full-on Hatchet Force coverage books that you'll get, and they're on Amazon for sale. And I highly recommend this book. But I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Mr. Gamble because that's who we're all here to see. So, Mr. Gamble, thanks for joining us, and I'm handing it to you.
My pleasure.
My pleasure.
Hey, everybody.
Yes, sir. You go ahead and lead off wherever you'd like to start.
Okay. It was a dark and stormy night back in 1945 when I was born. You're going to find out I'm kind of a joker. At any rate, I was born in Tucson, Arizona. Had a wonderful dad who unfortunately had contracted tuberculosis when he was 18, and he moved to Arizona to help with that. And they eventually removed a lung and a little portion of the second lung. So he could never do anything terribly physical. And he'd been an athlete and everything at the University of Kentucky, but, that part of his life was kind of gone. But he had really strict morals, really strict qualities that he passed on to me, and they've helped me all my life. My mom was from Michigan, and she moved out to Arizona with her mother because her mother had horrible arthritis. Her hands were all, anyway, great grandmother for me. But that's how the two of them wound up in Arizona, and that's where I got my start. We lived most of my life in Tucson, and went to Tucson High, and then I went to the University of Arizona because it was the only place I could afford, and I had to put myself through college. And I went about 3 semesters, and the dean called and said, "Hey, drop by and see me." And he said, "You know what? I think it would be better if you tried something else first." And I said, "I think so too," because I really didn't like college much. And so I left and got a job at the hospital. And my mother always gave me reading material. And for my 18th birthday, she gave me a book, The Green Berets. And I'd been thinking about going and joining the Marines. Wait, okay, I'm good now. And And I was working at the hospital and I was reading this book, and it was really extolling the virtues of Special Forces medics. And I thought, I'm going to do that. So I went down and enlisted in the Army, and they let me go to jump school. And fortunately, everything worked out. I went to basic training, tested high enough to go into Special Forces, but unfortunately also tested high enough to go into OCS, which is something I had never considered. But I thought, hey, that sounds sweet. So I did that instead. And if I had to identify one huge mistake in my life, that was it. And I went to OCS instead of going to Special Forces medics. And I'd have been a doctor, and I'd have been living on the high hill and wherever I was if I'd gone to medics. But at any rate, I went on to Special Forces and after OCS, which pleased me greatly, and started out, of course, in the 3rd group, and then went over to the 5th group. I knew nothing at all about any of what I did, but I learned fast. They said, "We're going to send you up to Da Nang." And I said, "Oh, that sounds fun." And we went to Da Nang, and we happened to arrive there. First of all, we went by truck. And I'm thinking, this is creepy, man. What if we get ambushed? And they assured me that it was a secure AO between there. And sure enough, we rounded a small karst, and there was a Korean Marine compound, and they were all out there doing their Tai Chi or Taekwondo or whatever it was they were doing, and they looked pretty fierce to me. And I thought, okay, I can relax. So we got into the train just about lunchtime, and the truck parked in the middle of the 5th Group headquarters parking lot, and we sat there. We had the misfortune of arriving at POC time, and we sat out in that damn hot truck before anybody gave us a clue what to do. But at any rate, I got processed, and the next morning I was on my way to Da Nang. And from there, I went to FOB1 in Phu Bai. And, that was my great adventure was beginning. And I was up for it. I joined the Army voluntarily. I wanted to go represent my country. And I was really pleased. And off we went. I got assigned because I was an officer, which is another one of those things. I got assigned to the reaction force, the HF, the Hatchet Force, because that's where officers go, I guess. And we started training. We had a bunch of Cambodian mercenaries. And what an education for a 21-year-old guy. I mean, in all the different culture and all that stuff. But at any rate, we got a mission fairly quickly. And we went out. Of course, you can't get into Laos with 36 guys and 6 helicopters without, being noticed. And so we had contact, reasonably early and came out after about 3 days. But we didn't lose anybody, and I don't know what good we did, but we did see some trucks and stuff like that. And lo and behold, my company commander, my best friend for life, the best man at my wedding, the most amazing guy I've ever met was Bill Vowell. And Bill Vowell was a first lieutenant, and he had come from the University of Alabama, typically Southern, but what a great man he was. And I know some of you know him, and he's still just as crazy. But anyway, he was in charge, and I was the other guy. And off we went, and we started doing that. Well, he went to Saigon to get debriefed on what we had done. And he was still in Saigon when a bright light came through for basically one of our teams had gotten into, some pretty serious shit on the side of a mountain in Laos. And I'm sorry, I got to start walking. And they got in a bad situation, and we sent in a few Army helicopters that were assigned to us overnight, and they got 1 or 2 of them shot down. And then the King Bees went, and they got 1 or 2 of them shot down. And then about 1 in the morning, they called the Jolly Greens, and the Jolly Greens went in. The first one got in, got everybody on the team out except the team leader and the radio operator. And on its way out, it got hit. I think it was hit 83 times, and basically limped into Quezon. And they wanted us to get out there right away and do whatever we found needed to be done. And so we were scheduled out at 6:30 in the morning, and we all got up and got our kit and got out to the LZ and sat in order, and nothing happened. And 7:30 in the morning, nothing happened. At 8 in the morning, they told us all to go back into camp and get breakfast. So we went back into camp and got breakfast, and then came out about 9:30. And at 9:30 in the morning, nothing happened. Eventually, about 1:30, we heard the helicopters coming. We had H-34s from the Marine Corps, and as in all the air support we ever had, they were fabulous. But they finally came grinding in there and made a lot of dirt and dust, and off we went. And en route, we're flying to this place which had become a hellhole. And looking down at the waterfalls and the jungle, I'd never really seen much of it before. And I was charmed by the whole country. I thought, what a beautiful place. It's too bad there's a war going on. And we landed about 2,000 meters from where the last Jolly Green had gone in. It had pulled out and had a fire in one of the engine and just flipped over and rolled down into a ravine and rolled downhill. And we did get a beeper, and we knew there was a survivor, at least one. And so we set off to, first of all, find the wrecked helicopter and then get whoever was there out. Well, we found a helicopter, and yeah, I don't describe it clearly in my book or anything, but there had been a door gunner, there had been a pilot, a co-pilot, and we had our guy, our team leader, which was, isn't it awful? You get old, you escapes me for a second. I am. Anyway, there were 6 or 7 people on board the helicopter, and it was, by the time we got there, 7 hours too late, it was just a pile of molten metal. And we found a few people in the helicopter. No need to go into a description. A couple of people had gotten out of the helicopter, and we found them. Basically, they had started a run downhill, but they all appeared to have been on fire at the time. And at any rate, that was awful. And we were still getting a beeper, and then we were getting voicemail from a guy who was the pilot. And we eventually started looking for him. We found everybody else, and they were spread. A couple of guys had gotten out and run away, and a couple of guys had gotten trapped in the crash. And they were there, and you know, we had bodies. Probably they were within 500 meters of each other. We started collecting the remains and stuff, and one of the Marine gunships said, "Hey, we see a guy at the edge of the tree line at such and such, and he looks like an American. And I'm going to make a low pass and see what happens." So he made a low pass. He didn't receive much fire, and it was indeed an American. So he said, "If I can throw enough stuff off the helicopter, we can probably pick him up." And I said, "Well, you'll get to him a lot faster than we will." So they threw out all their ammo, and they threw out their door guns, and they fired off some light the helicopter enough so they landed, got the guy who, the pilot was Jerry Young, and got him out and got him, back in the chain. And he wound up in Da Nang that night and was debriefed. And in the meantime, we had been briefed to go in, and that we would have to come out before sunset. And so it got to be 5 in the afternoon. I said, "I think we found everything that we're going to be able to find, and we're going to work our way toward a pickup zone and wait for you to come get us." And the radio said the famous "stand by." I don't know. I'm 21 years old. I've been in the Army 6 months. And I'm going, I don't know why that sounds ominous, but it did. Another guy comes on the radio, probably one of the bosses, and said, "We got a problem here. A storm has moved ashore. It's actually a typhoon, and all helicopters in Vietnam are grounded." And he said, "Hopefully it'll blow through and we can come get you in the morning. If you can find a safe place to hole up, So we went to the highest ground around and started sort of digging in. And you could look to the east and the clouds, I don't know, probably 40 or 50,000 feet high. I don't, they were huge. And there was rain everywhere. We didn't get it rained on. It was a peaceful night. Sort of half of it was filled with clouds and half of it was filled with beautiful stars. And we thought, okay, that's, we'll get up around 3 or 4, get organized and get ready to go. And it got to be 3 or 4, and we started feeling sprinkles. And of course, by then the typhoon had reached us. All the helicopters in Vietnam were able to fly. All the helicopters in Laos couldn't. So we kept waiting for something good to happen. And it never did. The long and the short of it is that we were there for 3 days. We had been briefed not to take any food. And so we didn't have food for 3 days. We had lots and lots of water. I mean, I've never been in a typhoon before, but that was impressive. And eventually they got to us, and we got, I got on board the choppers and got out of there without suffering any more casualties. We had to leave several bodies behind because we couldn't get them up the hill. The first night it was mostly because of enemy activity, and the second day it was mostly because it was raining cats and dogs. And all of you, or many of you, have experienced Laotian mud. It's even worse than Quezon mud. But we had to leave them, and we marked their bodies, and we had them all centralized, and we had a plan. The first thing in the morning, as soon as we had contact, send one helicopter, and he could go to where we collected the remains and winch them out. And finally, Covey came in about 5 in the morning and said, this is Covey, we're on our way. And I said, hey, wait a minute, we want you to send a helicopter and a couple of gunships. We want to get the remains out. We got them all down here in a little flat place. And Covey came back and said, no, that's not going to happen. And he said, they're on their way. They're going to be here in 20 minutes. And from Saigon on down, the only thing the bosses want is to get you out of there. And I said, no, everything's ready. And they said, tough. And, during the several nights and stuff, we had some support from a flare ship. And it became fairly obvious, I guess, to everybody that this little area with the helicopters had worked so well as a flight trap that they were going to leave us up there and start moving in. They were moving in anti-aircraft. Now, we had a flare ship one night and said, it's getting a little dicey around the corner from you. And what we're going to have to do is go off. And every now and then we'll make a pass and drop a bunch of flares, and then we're going to fly out of there because, frankly, they're setting up another flag trap, and we don't want to get caught. And so we knew that they were getting ready for us. At any rate, we did what we were told, and we had to leave several people, deceased people, behind. And that was sort of hard cheese, and that was sort of how I broke in. I went on several other bright lights, and I went on several other patrols and stuff. The thing about the Hatchet Force, it was sort of a necessary component of what was going on, because when the shit hit the fan, and it often did with emphasis, and we needed somebody ready to mount up that was familiar with everything and could get there and give help. That was what our function was, and we were good with that. We didn't get used too much, which was also good, but the bosses would get tired of seeing us around the camp, and after we'd been down for a week or two, they'd concoct something. And the briefing would be, we don't know what to tell you or what you should expect, but go in there and see what you can stir up. And so off we go just to get at camp. And we stirred up shit all the time. But eventually I'd been on the Hatchet Force for maybe 6 or 8 months. And I got moved to assistant operations, and became a cubby rider. And then Bill had 3 months to go, and he wanted to be in operations. So I stepped away from operations and took the job as S1 for the last 3 months. And he became the operations guy. And pretty soon, just after FOB4 CCN had been attacked with the sappers and so forth, I left. And I wouldn't have left except I had met this girl. She was a blind date in Fayetteville, and I just really wanted to get back to her. And so I did. I took the opportunity to get out of there, came back, got married. Missed my first wedding anniversary because I was back in Vietnam. And that was sort of a strange deal. But basically, that's the story of how I got started. And I'd be delighted to answer any questions.
Some of these up, but we've definitely already got quite a few. And I know I've got several from when me and you have spoke that I'll mention as well. But here's some of the first few questions, and I'll put them up on the screen for you real quick as well. We've got. Can you read that, or do I need to read it out loud?
No, I can read it. My old eyes are still functioning, at least at that level. The difference is, that's a weird answer, we're none and many. We were a reconnaissance outfit, and the recon teams were the gods, and none of us had any problem with that. What an incredible bunch of guys. And, our job was to sit back and support them when they needed it. And we were good. So the Hatchet Force, as I mentioned, when you moved the Hatchet Force around, it wasn't like you were sneaking in anywhere. You just came in with a big roar and started shooting. But with the recon forces, it's so difficult to get into Indian country. And, at least they can. Some of the recon teams that I saw leave only had 4 guys. And, you can be quiet and do some serious damage with 4 guys. Once we got into Laos with the Hatchet Force, if we didn't have a directed mission, we'd do what the recon teams did also. And I, spent some time counting trucks and things like that. And our logistical problems were greater because we had more people. And getting resupplied and so forth was more difficult. But we were definitely a recon outfit. And I will say this: I was a young, shy officer, and I loved being amongst those guys and listening to them talk. And they were fantastic. Every one of them, even the bad ones, were better than any good guy in any other outfit. But they were fantastic. But I had, other than Bill, who roomed with me, and Chips Fleming, who roomed with me, I had no friends. The enlisted guys, it's special forces. The enlisted guys had been there a while. Most of them knew each other before they got there. They didn't want to have anything to do with officers. Officers were just a necessary evil that they had to contend with. And so they avoided officers. I had one enlisted guy that befriended me, and I was grateful for it. But basically, I just sat over in the corner, and that was disappointing. I really thought it was going to be a little more Wild West, and I was going to get more action and that kind of thing. But I have absolutely, don't take that as a complaint because I have no complaints. What a job. It was unbelievable, but there were differences and they were significant. I don't know if that answers anybody's question or not, but that's the way it was.
That was a good. Um, we've got another one. Miller's Marauders has several questions for us, so I'll have them.
As far as I assume this question, the question is, what kind of IADs did you practice with, so forth and so on. I assume you're asking more about the enemy devices that we encountered and what we did about them. And as far as what we did, we used claymores. We were a company. We were a company that was a platoon-sized unit, and we used claymores and we used little toe poppers, and that was pretty much it. We had we didn't encounter the typical early things like punji pits and all that kind of. That was in South Vietnam. Since we were operating essentially in the NVA territory, they didn't have a lot of exotic, crazy, booby traps like that. But they did. Once we got in an area, they did, and a lot of it was just the typical fishing line battery explosive thing. Booby traps. I'm trying to think. I don't think any of us ever really had real problems with booby traps. The real problems came from booby traps that previous teams and previous SOG teams had put in when they were in the area, and we were unaware of them. We had a couple of unnecessary tragedies with that, but we didn't encounter anything special. Nothing. First of all, anything they put in, they did hastily, and a lot of them we just saw, and it just it hardly concerned us. And we had good point guys. Point guys, saved us all a couple of times by seeing tripwires and things like that. And I can remember walking. Why I was leading, I don't know, but I was leading the unit down a trail, and the sun was starting to go down, and suddenly, right before my eyes, I mean, like 6 or 8 inches out, there was a flash of a line, and I sort of started to fall over backwards, and to keep from tripping it. Well, it turned out it was part of a spider web, but nonetheless, it got my attention. It's really not a good question for me. I don't know what answer you're looking for, but I probably didn't give it.
That was pretty much what they were looking at, especially y'all being a whole company. That puts it in perspective.
Yeah, when we did encounter explosive devices, we had our engineer guy, and he carried C4 and stuff. We usually just blew them up. And sometimes that was fun because when we blew one up and then we faded into the brush, a couple of NVA had come looking, to see what had happened. And so we got small body counts from their own booby traps, but you never know.
We've got a new question up right here. About, did y'all train as a whole Hatchet Force company?
We up at Phu Bai, which was adjacent to the 3rd Marine headquarters, there was a huge amount of deforested land, and there was a big open area, 5, 6, 10 acres. Right, we had a camp that had been an old French camp, and then Highway 1 was right outside the gate. And then 8 feet from that was the railroad track. And then beyond that was open defoliated country. So it was hard to train in there. because it was not jungle. We went through all the motions without the trees, and we did a lot of firearms training. And my little Cambos were pretty good shots, and they loved to gamble. Boy, they loved to gamble almost more than anything. And one day we were out at the range, and we'd been shooting some stuff up, and we were walking back, and one of the Cambos came up to me and said, "Sir, you see that yellow rock on the hill?" And it was caliche, limestone stuff. And yeah, I knew which one he was talking about. I said, "Yeah." He said, "I bet my man can hit it 20 times out of 20. And I will bet you $5. And you bet me $10 that he won't, that you will." I said, "Sure." So I, flipped the old car up there and fired single shot, but really, really fast, and hit it 20. It was just gravel by the time I finished. And their guy got up and he started shooting. He was a good shot. And when it was all over, he'd missed twice. And it broke their heart to give me $5. I felt so bad. I kept trying to give it back and they wouldn't take it. They were honorable gamblers, but we didn't get a lot of really great training. On the east side, we were down, already headed down into the coast. So it was lowlands, and we would train in there, and sometimes we'd go out at night on patrols and stuff like that. There were VC in there for sure, or NVA. And we had several occasions where we had firefights and that kind of thing. But our ability to train was not terrific. And that's all I got.
Here we go. Here's the good question.
Okay, how deep were you? The question is, how deep were you going across the fence at the time? We've heard some other HS men say they weren't going all that far. I think the furthest across, I think we were in 20 some odd meters, and that sucked because we were really far away from anything. We had, of course, no artillery, and helicopters. We were about extreme range. They would drop us off in there, and when they'd come back, they'd only have 10 or 20 minutes of fuel. And, we had to get everybody aboard and out of there in 10 or 20 minutes. But I started out, and I think we were pretty shallow at first. The first one Bill and I went on, we were probably only seven kilometers in, probably. And then when I went back in after Jolly Green 2-6, that was more like 18. And we were much closer to Quezon, southeast or southwest of Quezon. But I think we were 18 or 20 kilometers from Quezon. And then after that, I stopped kind of worrying about it. But we had several penetrations that went 20 kilometers or better. But I would agree with what most of the other HS are saying, that generally we were a lot more shallow.
You got covered with them. And I'm actually curious about your answer on this too. You worked with both of these groups. Well,
the next question is, can you talk about the difference in Nungs and Cambos? Well, they're spelled differently. And, when you're a heck from Arizona, it's this old joke, they all look alike. But they had a lot of features that were different. I think the Nungs were more aggressive, probably. There was nothing wrong with the Cambodians. They did not suffer from they didn't all suffer from any kind of, serious fear or anything like that. I felt sorry for the little guys. I mean, we had guys as young as 10 or 12 years old, I think. And the deal was the recruiter should go down to down to South, go down to Cambodia, and they would recruit people and bring them back up. And the village chief got money for everybody that he would send. And so he would send anybody. He'd send Papa San, he'd send some little kid. But we had all kinds of ages. They all performed all right. There was enough differences in the language that was hard for us. And I got no complaints about the Cambos. Love them. They were great, but they were definitely different than the Nungs. And that doesn't really do a good job of answering that question, but I don't know what to tell you. They were courageous. Both Nungs and Cambos were courageous, and they did what they were told. And that was basically it. What were the difference the Indians carried and the Americans? When we went across, the Indians carried, the usual battle rattle, like most infantrymen. They were small people and very strong. And of course, they spent their whole life walking up and down mountains. But we carried extra stuff. We carried our radio. And the Americans, and this is something I've never heard mentioned anywhere before, but when we went across, and there were generally, 6 or 8 of us, Americans, with a 36-man unit. And the one thing that was different, other than communication stuff, is we carried albumin, which was a blood expander, and it came in it was in a bottle inside a tin can that had a sardine-like opener, and we would tape it with black electrical tape to the backs of our harnesses so that when you put your head back, it would hold your head up. And we did that because those poor little guys, they would bleed out really fast and they'd go into shock really fast. So all the Americans carried extra medical supplies. And other than that, I'm really not tripping on differences. I think each of the specialties, engineers and radio and things like that, carried different items. We didn't let the Cambos carry all our American stuff because some of it we didn't want them to lose. And there were differences, but they were subtle. I mean, basically, if you looked at us, we looked the same.
Here's one from Revolt. Someone asking.
Here's a question. Did you ever hear from that guy who took you for airplane rides and gave you a nice, I suppose you're probably talking about Cubby. And I flew mostly with a guy by the name of Bart Switzer. Cool guy, just a little bit older than I was, calm. He got a kick out of the whole thing, and he was there because he wanted to be. He was a great pilot. And after the war, we lost touch. I think, oddly enough, I heard that he had gone to medical school and that he was a doctor of radiology and that he operated out of the Tucson Medical Center, oddly enough. And I called out there a couple of times, saying, you have a Dr. Switzer, and I'll have to take a message. He's busy. And he never called me back, so I don't know whether he was the right guy or not. But one of the big problems, and one of the problems I had, was I didn't keep up a lot of contacts after the war because I didn't have a lot of contacts to begin with. I had a couple of guys. I had the guys that worked for me, and they were a team from Okinawa, and they were special. They were great guys, and I kept up with most of them 20 years or so. But I didn't keep up with any other people. I mean, I would see their name and I would say, like when they post something and that kind of thing. But that was a kind of lonely time for me. And, I didn't keep up. So, no. So, yes and no, for whatever that's worth.
I've been curious about this question. As a matter of fact, myself, this is a good question right here.
We never got down. The question is that we ever learn anything more. We engaged a group of NVA, and they had a Russian advisor with them. And we never got down to where we had put them down because it was about 1,400 meters. They were in a gully walking down a stream, and we were on the mountain side. And we never went down there just because moving away from where we were meant probably we were never going to get back. But, there's plenty of agreement that there were Russians there. And this guy definitely, you look at him through the binoculars, he had on a dirty white pith helmet and he had a red beard and he was taller. And, he was definitely, I think, Russian. And the reason I think that, because we also talked to a Russian on the radio while we were there, and we offered her an opportunity to come up with us and go home with us and be treated. Actually, that's what she offered us. Anyway, it was a female colonel, and she got on the radio and said, "You guys have fought hard, and you're brave men, and if you'll just come down to the bottom of the hill, you'll be captured and treated honorably." And Sergeant Hamilton was on, sort of had picked up the radio when he heard voices, and I was climbing up the hill to where the radio was, and I heard him say, "Well, fuck you," And I thought, "What now?" So I went over to him. I said, "What's going on?" He says, "I'm talking to some Russian bitch, and she wants us to surrender." I said, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "Sir, I swear." And I said, "Well, let me listen a minute." So I said, "Hello?" And by golly, this female voice, very accented, but the English was good, came on. "I'm Ludmilla." I never remembered her last name, but her first name was Ludmilla. And she was a colonel in the Russian advisory, the PAVN, the People's Army of Republic. And at any rate, she was an advisor, and we were in a hopeless position that we would never be able to get out of there, and we would run out of food if we didn't all get killed beforehand. He said, "There's not a chopper that's going to get in here without getting shot down," which, certainly led itself to our belief that we had gone from aggressor to bait. But, she talked for a second, and I said, "I'll tell you what, why don't you come up here and surrender to us?" And she said, "Well, no, I can't do that. Those aren't my orders." Fuck you. I hung up the radio, Well, Cody came back in the area just a minute or two later, and we could hear him up there, and we'd gone to alternate frequency, and we kept trying to call him. He finally responded, "Where have you guys been? We've been calling and calling." I said, "Yeah, we had a little problem. Change over to the alternate. We're good now." So, never got a chance to follow up on any of that. I asked a couple of guys at the ARS station if they'd intercepted anything like that. And they were all pretty cool guys, and they all started shaking their head no and winking at me. So I guess they heard the transmissions, but the transmissions never resurfaced again. And I became that dumb lieutenant who was seeing things. And for that, I think I left there. That was my reputation pretty much.
Here's another good one from the book that really Marauders had.
I gave that to my grandson when we were fishing, and he was thrilled. I mean, he loved all that stuff. And he went off down the stream and came back without it, and he had tears in his eyes. He said, "Papa, I looked and I looked and I looked and I couldn't." It's okay. So the original one is gone. Yeah, I still have a booty hat, but it's not the booty hat.
I know that had to break his heart, but what a good grandpa to say that don't worry about it. I know that made all the difference in that. I'm sure he was terrified to come back and tell you he had lost it.
Well, you know, I have absolutely, hands down, no questions, the best 4 grandkids in the world. And I know you're all sitting there, my grandkids are better. No, they're not. Nobody's got better grandkids than I do. But that's a discussion for another day.
That's good. Jason's got a good question for you guys here.
What was the craziest thing I saw in the field? Well, I saw 2 Vietcong or NVA units, you're never sure which exactly, fighting each other. Little tax collection parties, and apparently they both wound up in the same ville one night, and they had a gunfight and didn't collect taxes, and that to me, and it precluded us from worrying about it because they about killed each other completely, you know, and then they ran off. But that was crazy. But I saw some other funny things, and that's the one thing about the United States Army, the United States Marine Corps, the United States Navy, the United States Air Force. Everybody in there got a weird sense of humor, and you know, we all go out and we do stupid shit because we can. But the strangest one was the 2 units on the same side fighting each other. And I guess that would be my answer. The next question is, did we ever add personnel to make a larger team? I think that, as I said, my eyes aren't that good. Hold on, let me reread. Did you? They want to know if I ever worked with other companies or other recon teams on missions, and the answer is yeah. It wasn't any real big deal. We didn't have enough guys. We didn't have enough guys for anything. So I never worked with a whole other recon team. Now I got shipped out a couple of times to Khartoum and what else? At any rate, to augment their teams and stuff. So yeah, we worked together, but they weren't full company. And the recon teams, I always felt like we were being looked down on by the recon teams, and you know, we were a necessary evil because the colonel said we had to be there, you know. And the recon teams didn't really love the idea of going with us. And I love the idea of having them come along, but it hardly ever happened. So the basic answer is no, but yes, work with it.
This one's kind of interesting because earlier someone that was asking about immediate action drills, and this kind of ties into the same thing, kind of a question about tactics.
It's an interesting question, and it's even more interesting to me because when I went back the second time, that damn personnel captain would not let me go back in special forces. And so I wound up being the company commander of a rifle company in the 1st Division. And hold on, I got to change rooms because I'm running out of battery. I'm not real fast these days. Want to see my house?
The bed's not ready.
Oh, and my wife says the bed's not made, so try to maintain. Okay, there's another plug. At any rate, because of the nature of the terrain more than anything else, everything we did was almost single file. The recon team, certainly, because they were small little units and they could get through the brush and stuff a lot easier if they didn't spread out too much. And when I went back to the 1st Division, my first time was everything was single file. I mean, the the vegetation and the terrain over in Laos was just really bad. But I had this company in the 1st Division, and I spent a week with them with their current captain, and then he went home, and he was one of those beloved guys. Everybody liked him. Nothing much had gone on with that company, and so off we went, and we went off single file. Well, I didn't have a whole lot of problem with that until we got to areas that we could spread out a little bit. The first thing we came to that I changed formations was came to a big open field, and they started across it single file. And I called a halt and brought everybody back and said, we're not going to be crossing big open spaces like this single file. Here's the formation I want. And I went with each platoon made a diamond, and we had a diamond shaped had the 1st platoon up front, the 2nd platoon to the left, the 3rd platoon to the right, the 4th platoon to the back, and we spread way out. And I said, have you guys ever used any flank security? And most of the people said, well, not really. And I said, well, we're going to have flank security for this kind of thing. So each platoon go back and designate 2 guys to protect your flank. And so we got all set again. All that took about 10 minutes. And we started off, and we'd probably gone about 50 yards. I don't know. But off on the right side. And I thought, oh, shit, now what? So I went over there, and there's this ashen-faced infantry private with a smoking gun. And he's looking at me with these big wide eyes. And I looked at him and I said, see, if that had been the NVA, you would have saved all of us. That's why we have flank security and that kind of thing. And that's why in the future, we're going to protect each other. What you did, and what he did was, there was one of the little barking deer that were down, around Saigon and places like that, had been under a bush. And as this guy walked up, the deer split. And this guy just instinctively shot him. And I said, now you got a problem because it's your deer. You can do what you want, including just leave it here. But what I would suggest is throw it up on your pack, and we're going to get to a village here before too long, and you can sell it. And he said, really? You let me do that? And I said, sure. Yeah, you shot it, you sell it. And so he got $50 for the deer. Everybody in the village chipped in money, and they got a fresh killed deer, and he was grinning ear to ear, and boy, then everybody wanted to be on flank, But when we worked SOG, we worked single file, basically.
This question's interesting because you're one of the few people I've spoken to that actually went to the 1-0 school while it was at Camp Duck, and this question is very interesting.
Let's see. Do you remember? Yeah, I do. And I'll start out. The thing that impressed me most about the 1-0 school is the first thing we did every morning was run the length of the runway, cross the runway, run the length back. And it probably amounted to maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles, don't know. But we did that every morning in formation with no security. And we were sitting there just a few kilometers from the Cambodian border, and I'm thinking any two guys with automatic weapons could wipe us out anywhere, and we do this every day. Why is there not some concern about, protecting the running group while they run in enemy territory? And I never did get an adequate, I think again, it was manpower and who knows. So I remember the running, but we were taught, it was interesting for me because when I went to 1-0 school, the unattended ground sensors had just been introduced. And one of the things three of us did is we took a bunch of unattended ground sensors, little geo spikes that you put in near the trail, and then you back up into the brush and you got a little monitor. And when it picks up earthquake-like disturbances, it'll go beep, 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 and let you know that the enemy's coming down the trail. And so we messed with that for a couple of days. And personally, I didn't think much of it, which is ironic because when I got out of the officer's course and tried to go back to Fort Bragg, they sent me to Fort Huachuca instead, and I taught classes on unattended ground sensors. I wasn't the biggest fan, but I taught a good class. At any rate, let's see. So we did that. We did, also some cursory map reading and some things in the communications area that I had not known further. I mean, the radio operators were fantastic. They knew all kinds of stuff. And I enjoyed the 1-0 school just because I enjoyed the company. But I didn't find it terribly helpful to me because I think a lot of us were not ever intended to head to the recon team. So I don't have any firm memories about it.
What was Cam Duck like at this point in time? Was it getting ready to shut down, or was it still full?
Cam Duck was kind of when I rolled into FOB4 CCN headquarters, I was on a bus from the airfield, and we turned in, and there was this gigantic black monolith overlooking the SF camp. And I thought, who the hell picked this out? There was no security there. The ocean on one side, the river on the other, the Marines up north, and I guess the NVA down south. I thought the site was terrible. But with Special Forces, they had such a limiting problem because they had to be able to get water and they had to be able to get air supply. And to do that, you had to be not on, there usually wasn't very much high ground that would do that. So you had to go down low to get the water and build a runway and stuff. So you were always sort of surrounded. And we did that. Excuse me, I got a cough. Anyway, we moved it to Phu Bai, and that was a lot more open. And I thought, now this makes some sense. But of course, the French had been there first and tried to do it right. But as far as 1-0 school, I have no real rigid, hard memories from that. I know that the guys that taught us were very, very experienced and they were very interested, but I don't really think that they got into stuff I wasn't aware of. So I probably should have flunked.
Here's an interesting one. I've always actually been interested in. Never asked you or another Hatchet Force Man, it's a good question.
Well, the thing with the Hatchet Force, you had to find a landing zone, and they weren't just everywhere. It wasn't so bad for the recon teams because they could go into a bomb crater or whatever. But when we had to bring in 6 helicopters, bringing them in one at a time wasn't a great idea. It's what we did a lot, but it's not a great idea. And so excelling, we basically knew how many guys we had and how many helicopters were coming, divided everybody up, and tried to find a place that was fairly secure on high ground that would take one or more helicopters. And it was quick once it happened. When the chopper showed up, we were in and out of there in a pretty big hurry. The guys were good at getting home, but there weren't huge. We didn't have to ladder out. We didn't have to McGuire out or do any of that stuff. There were just too many of us. I've done those things, but the getting the guys out, it was more discipline. They knew what they had to do to get home, and they got in position and got on the birds real fast. And we could usually get out of a place in 15 to 20 minutes. I have no funny stories. It was always a dangerous time. Any run-ins with wildlife? Oh, yeah, of course, everybody will tell you this. And I think 3/4 of them are probably telling you the truth. Many of us heard tigers. Many of us saw tigers. Some of us saw elephants. I think the most, the worst thing was, and this was not when I was with Special Forces, I was with the 1st Division, and for some reason, for a week, my rifle company was assigned to a track unit. And so we rode around on these tracks on the edge of the Rugsat Swamp, doing whatever track units do. And a couple of really funny things happened. Of course, they put the cyclone fence out in front of the tracks at night to stop incoming RPGs and stuff. And this track unit was really good. Actually, they had a pretty good little leader, a little lieutenant, but he knew his stuff. And we'd get set up for the night, and they'd put the cyclone fences up, and they'd put out claymores. And one evening, the platoon commander had to go to the bathroom. And so he trudged out there and said, "Look, I'm going to take a shit. I'm going to be beyond the fence. Careful." And so sure enough, a few minutes later, you look up and there's this little white ass sticking out of the bushes doing what he does. And suddenly there's a huge explosion. Boom, right about where he was. And somebody had jumped off one of the tracks, and they had a clacker for the claymore in their pocket, and it dropped out of their pocket, hit the ground, and sent the claymore off. Fortunately, it was enough to one side that it didn't hurt him at all. But boy, when the dust cleared, that is the whitest white man I've ever seen. But he was a good dude. So funny things did happen, and I don't know. Wildlife and insects. Oh, I know why I wanted to talk about the tracks. I had a nice company. It was almost all guys that were drafted. And they were fine young men, and they loved their mothers, and they respected their fathers, and they did what they were told. And I was pretty happy with them. But one day we were tracking it along the edge of the swamp, and the lead track goes under a large tree and suddenly stops, and everybody jumps off and starts running all kinds of different. And I thought, what in the hell is it? And so we got up there. The track had run under the tree, which held a big fire ant nest. and it had disturbed the fire ants, and they dropped down into the track and on the guys. And here's where the Special Forces connection is. About that time, I heard a helicopter coming. I didn't know and I could see that it was a Green Hornet. I didn't have their frequencies or anything like that, but I popped a smoke. And sure enough, he made a tight circle and came down and landed. Said, "What do you need?" And I said, "I need these two guys taken to the hospital before they die of anaphylactic shock." And he said, "No problem." And put them in there and flew off to wherever the Phu Bai hospital was. But those Green Hornet guys were just, I was so jealous of Central because they had assigned helicopters, and we had great helicopter support, wonderful guys, but they were not assigned to us. Different helicopters show up every morning, and I always thought that was a weakness in our operation. So those were the animals. Snakes, of course. Saw a couple of crates. We had some green vipers that would be in the bamboo a lot. And we were doing something, getting settled, and one of my troops says, "Sir, look!" And I look where he's pointing, and coming down the trail is a huge black cobra. Thing was probably 15 feet long, and he looked pissed too because he was coming kind of fast. And I said, "Well, shoot him." And the kid looked at me and was looking at his rifle, and it just, that wasn't part of his training. So I grabbed mine up and shot the snake, and it finally fell dead about 8 rounds later. And everybody in the company wound up with a cobra skin hat band. They jumped on that snake and skinned it so quick it surprised me. But those were the animals. There were interesting things out there.
That's one thing interesting because you actually carried I think you carried the most ammo I've ever heard of anyone carrying. So I'll be anxious for you to talk about this.
Simple answers to this. Yes, I have been down to one magazine, and you guys are probably asking, know how we packed the magazine and knew about how much we had. And I was down to my Tracer magazine, so I only had one magazine. And that happened once or twice. I carried 380 rounds with me, which is a lot. But yes, I've come in almost bereft of ammunition. And I have come in without water. Boy. And then you run and drink and drink and drink and turn around and throw up. That's always beautiful. But yes, we have run out of things, or we never had things we should have had because the situation changed. But yeah, it got kind of dicey that way.
Oh, here we go. Explosive stories. These are always my favorite too, actually, to be honest.
Okay, got to read it.
He's asking if you had any crazy stories with explosives. Seems like everyone has at least one.
Well, other than cooking with C4, I don't, but I always had, as in every specialty, I always had excellent engineers and demo guys. And I had the misfortune of being the officer. So I never directly dealt with some of that stuff, but I had guys that knew what they were doing. And we had a lot of occasion to use explosives, but not me.
This one's also on top of this question. I'll may have to ask it later, but you also had issues with your Cambos having coals out in the fields, and I remember in one of your stories you had to dang near carry one because the cough syrup got a hold of them too hard.
Yeah, you're talking about the Cherokee group. We were out one night, and some of the it was a local patrol, so most of the indigenous guys didn't really think much about it, and a couple of them didn't even want to be there. Well, one of them didn't even want to be there, and I think he had tuberculosis or something, but the medic gave him a shot of Cheracol with codeine, and the coughing ceased and was quiet for about an hour, and then the coughing started up again, and the medic gave him another dose of Cheracol with codeine, and the coughing ceased. In about an hour, the coughing started again, only there were 6 or 8 guys coughing this time. They'd figured out if they would cough, the medic would give them dope. And so they were all coughing for Cheracol. And we eventually sacked it up and went home. But yeah, as far as any other kind of drugs, I was dealing with professionals, the guys that were in our camp. I don't know what they did in the dark spaces. And I can't believe that there weren't a couple that weren't doing drugs, because there were a couple of them that were that crazy. But eventually, just toward the end of my tour, we got a whole bunch of radio operators in, and they built a big bunker that they put all their radio gear in. And they were good young men, all freshly trained, but after they moved in, it was the first time I smelled marijuana in the camp. But other than that, it had nothing to do with drugs.
Here's one that it's always a interesting question as well. Did you have any contact or any interesting stories from your Indig village visits, or stories coming out of the camps if you had ever heard?
Well, our situation was kind of weird because we had Cambodians, and they were recruited out of the 3 Corps area east of Saigon. And of course, we were in the I Corps area way north of Saigon. So a couple of them would go home every weekend, but we didn't go to the villages with them. We were in camp doing that stuff. So that wouldn't really apply to me, although I'm sure, they treated us all so well. And I do remember there was the Cambodians put on a feast for, I guess it was right around Tet. And a couple of weeks before, they brought in this old, emaciated cow and staked him out by the latrine, because that's where the only green grass was. And the cow would eat some of the latrine-fed grass and wander around a little bit. And eventually, it came time for the banquet. Day before, the cow disappeared, and so the banquet came, and they started giving us all these delicacies, and of course, we had beer, Phu Bai, and they had a lot of it, and it was their deal to challenge us to chugging contest. So of course, we were drinking about 4 times the rate they were. And I got up a couple of times. I went out and threw up in a potted plant. But eventually the thing was over, and I was drunk as hell. And every American was drunk as hell. You should have seen us walking back to our hooch. We were bad news. But they had been very good to us. We got to eat 100-day-old eggs for the only time in my life. And we got really, really drunk on beer that turned out to be half formaldehyde. And, I'm a 20-something-year-old kid. I mean, this is the great adventure of my life. But there are a lot of funny things went on.
I love hearing those stories. I mean, that's just amazing. Here's actually a really good question. I'm always curious about the survival. Jason was wondering, you talked about survival earlier. It seemed you really like and admire. Speak a little bit about him.
Bill was tall. He was a big guy. He lived in Alabama, and he was really smart in the way that I'm not. He was a history kind of guy, and he knew a lot of stuff. He was wonderful to talk to because he was brilliant without being obnoxious about it. and I enjoyed all the time I spent. He was a great leader, and I think if you'll poll other people from FOB1, they will all say the same thing. I remember this one officer, tall guy, and that was him. He was remarkable, and he is remarkable. He's big and fat and can hardly walk, but he's still remarkable. I'd trust him with my life anywhere in any situation. And I know all those guys out there, they had friends like that over there, and they're priceless.
Sounds like one hell of a man. That's for sure. Um, Oh wow, Jason Collins is on here. He'd like to know, ask you about the big guy wearing the Buddha. Said it saved his life.
I knew the minute I saw his name, I knew that's what he was going to ask about. We started getting people in the camp that weren't SF qualified. I mean, they were assigned to the 5th, they wore the beret, blah, 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 blah. And this guy, I think, was a supply officer. But we were so short-handed, the qualified guys had to go to combat, and we needed, chair bearer to handle the rest of it. Anyway, he came in, nice guy, drew the bunk across the room from me. Very, very friendly, very, very interested. And he was a tourist. I mean, he was there pretty much for the adventure. And he went into town one day, and he went through the little shops and everything, and he came back with a great big ivory Buddha. And it was probably around the size of a $50, a silver dollar or something. And it was sort of flat. It was a disc with the Buddha on it. And he was pretty darn proud of it. And he was going around showing everybody, look what I got, look what I got. And everybody was rolling their eyes. And I said, that's plastic, right? He said, no, this one's ivory. And I said, well, that's okay, whatever. And all was good. But a few days after that, we started getting rockets. And we got, probably 4 or 5 122s and about the same number of 107s. And I was out in the compound doing something, and we had a big pile of sand right there that we were going to make cement and do whatever we were going to do. And I heard it. You can hear them coming. And it sounded like a Jake brake on an 18-wheeler. But I heard that thing coming, and I yelled, incoming! And I dove into that sand pile and started digging a hole. He's out in the middle of the compound, standing by the supply shed, and he's looking around. What the hell is going on? He'd never been through that before. And he's standing there, and a rocket came in, probably hit about 40 or 50 feet from him. And he went down like a sack of shit, And I ran over to him, and he was just sort of shaking it off. And he said, what was that? And I said, well, that was a NVA rocket, and you're okay, right? He said, no, my chest hurts, and I can hardly breathe. And I said, well, let me take a look. And we opened his tunic, and there was what was left of his Buddha, because it had cracked all to pieces and sort of fallen apart, with a piece of shrapnel still stuck in it. And it saved his life. And if he hadn't had the Buddha on, he'd probably definitely been killed. And so the next day we all went down and bought Buddhas. Why not?
Do you happen to remember who that was?
And he was a good guy. Don't get me wrong. He was really a good guy. But that was a close one.
That sounds like he got out just by the hair on his chin on that one.
He did. If it had been an inch to one side or the other, it probably would have got him bad.
Everyone's saying I would have converted to Buddhism right there.
You bet.
There was something else I was oh yes, you were weren't your Hatchet Force the group you were leading, weren't y'all known as the Red Devils?
We were the Red Devils. The Cambodians picked that name, and they had red and blue scarves made. And when they all stood inspection, they had their little scarves out, and they were the Red Devils. And they changed names a couple of times on the U.S. books, but to them, they were always the Red Devils. And yeah, they were very proud of that. Had their own pennant and all that kind of stuff. They were good guys.
I'm wondering, did you say they had the red scarves and everything that
Yeah.
they wore? Okay, I'm wondering if Jason's still on here, he might correct me. I'm wondering if that's same group that John Allen was a part of while he was at up north work. I'm like,
You know, I really don't know. I don't know who came after me, and I don't know who was there before me. All I know is some guy took me to a door and said, "This is where you'll work," and pushed me in. And, you know, other than that, I didn't know much of the history.
this is actually a question from a Project Omega recon man. He's curious about the average length of time hatchet forces would be out, y'all's average control, if there is an.
Well, there's reality and there's plans, and plans. It's good to plan. It's good to be ready for something, have some idea what you do. But the reality is plans never pan out. We generally went out expecting to be gone for 7 to 10 days. We generally came back in about 3. So, you know, with our size force, we attracted enemy attention immediately. And we could usually find a fight, you know, the second day. And we'd fight and stay in for a night and fight in the morning, and then they'd fade away and we'd fade away. But the plans were for longer stays.
Oh, this is a nice question. Maybe did you ever get your hands on a target folder before being inserted? If so, what kind of information would it be?
We're talking FOB1 here. You were lucky if you got a map. And if you got an aerial photo, that was priceless. I never saw a target folder.
Yeah, I mean, this is still early days. Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Bobby. That's some. Let's see. Guys, y'all have any more questions? No, I was gonna ask. A few of mine were already answered. Let's see here real quick. I did have one interesting question about. I just found it. You mentioned the 4 things that you found either interesting or that immediately hit you when you hit the FOB was the 5 a.m. moment.
Yeah, that damn monkey. We should have just killed him. We had a troop, an NCO, who got a monkey. And we had the monkey for a couple of days, and they thought it would be really hysterical to make it a parachute and throw it out of a plane. And so they had a parachute made and put it on the monkey and took him up in a helicopter about 2,000 feet, threw him out. And the monkey screamed. I wasn't there when they threw the monkey out, but they say he screamed like death warmed over and came down and landed on the ground and wasn't at all hurt. But he associated the sound of the helicopter blade with the 2,000-foot fall. And we didn't have assigned helicopter units. So most of our units came out of Da Nang and stuff. And when he'd hear them coming in, it'd be about 5:30 in the morning, and he'd start screaming when he heard a whop, whop, whop. And he'd start screaming, and he'd start screaming louder and louder. And pretty soon we could hear it. By then we were all up because we needed to get up and do stuff. And yeah, and he woke the whole camp up. And he lived in a tree at the end of my little 6-room dormitory thing. And he'd run up and down the branches, and he'd tear leaves off and throw them. And, you know, the Cambodians didn't like that, so they threw rocks at him, which didn't help. And the Americans just sort of ignored him. And eventually, when we got hit by a rocket and several buildings were on fire, he unfortunately burned up in one of the buildings. But that's the monkey, the 5 o'clock monkey.
The infamous 5 o'clock monkey.
That's
When I first saw that, I immediately broke out in laughter reading that. The book. That's hilarious. Um, this is actually a question from a viewer. I don't know if he's still live with us, but he's from Arizona and he's a good friend of mine. His father worked at the DPS. Pete Brewer. Um, Gamble should also remember a guy named Robert Bob Stout.
Bob.
Gamble was
I knew Bob Stout. Yeah, Bob was terrific. He was a terrific guy. I'll tell you Bob Stout's story.
oh yeah.
After he got out of the academy, he asked to be assigned to Gila Bend, which is on Interstate 8 between Yuma and Casa Grande. And the Gila River runs down through there, and there's a bunch of cliffs that he was a hang glider, and a bunch of cliffs. They had great upcrafts, and he wanted to go there, and so he went hang gliding all the time. And I was talking to him. How's it going, Bob? And he said, well, something different happened the other day. And I said, what's up? And he said, well, I went hang gliding, and I was up along the cliffs, and it was kind of cloudy, and I was thinking maybe I ought to get down because visibility was getting bad. And he said he fell asleep. The sun was on him, and he didn't know how high he was, but he thought, I gotta get my shit together and get out of here. And so he started doing that. And about the time that he started to descend, you got to understand, Gila Bend is a great Air Force gunnery range. About the time he was starting to descend, out of a nearby cloud came an F-16 at almost Mach 1 and probably passed within 20 feet of him. He said it almost collapsed the glider and scared the hell out of me. He said, and I'm not going to go that. I learned my lesson, but he was a funny guy, a good guy. He'd been an Ohio State trooper at one time. And I think he was Special Forces reservist, but he was a terrific guy. And I know there were several others. Let me tell you about a couple of guys I met this past week. I met a guy who kind of looked like he might be homeless, but he had a job picking up papers and stuff. And I said, hey, how you doing? He said, I'm doing all right, all things considered. And I said, yeah, things aren't so good, are they? He said, no, if it hadn't been for that damn war, I'd be fine. And I said, you talk about Vietnam? And he said, yeah. I said, well, what'd you do there? He said, this is not to be known by anybody else, but I was a contract sniper. And I said, a contract sniper? I've never heard of that. He said, yeah, the U.S. government contracted us to work with special forces. And I spent most of my time in Cambodia. And we would launch sometimes from Vietnam out of an airplane, and we had the wingsuits that they fly around the Alps in and stuff like that. And one time I wing flew all the way to Thailand, and I said, "That's a long way, boss." He said, "Yeah, it was an exciting job, and there weren't very many of us. There were like 6 or 8 contract snipers." And I said, "Well, that's fascinating. I hope I'll run into you again and hear more about your story." And I got in my car and drove away and burst out laughing. But and another guy I met through my doctor. I met a doctor's appointment, and he said, "You might know so and so." And I said, "Really? Why?" He said, "Well, he was in Vietnam, and he was a Green Beret. He was a captain, and he was a door gunner." And I'm going, God, Doc, I don't know how to break it to you, So I didn't say anything and let him think that his other patient was a captain door gunner in the Green Berets. But they're out there everywhere. The world's full of wannabes.
Sadly, so.
For the bitter, meager few of us that are actually actuals, that's a point of pride. Any outstanding? In answer to this question, yeah, there are. I wound up as the de facto XO of I think it was 323. They were an Okinawan team that had been sent to Vietnam temporary duty, and good guys. There were a lot of good guys, and the team sergeant, was Master Sergeant, taught me a lot. He was my mentor. And he's the guy I looked for, when I had a military problem. He's a good, good man. And I'd love for you to talk to him, but that entire team hated officers. They had nothing to do with officers. And they were appropriate with me, and a good bunch of guys, but I doubt very much if he wants to be interviewed.
I can understand. Yeah, and again, guys, if y'all have not gotten to Gambler's book, y'all need to. It is, in my opinion, it's probably the best coverage of what life in the Hatchet Force, and also running recon and working with an infantry line. So it's a wonderful book. I've added the show note, a link to it in the show notes, and I'll add it to the description as well. But there's a great section talking about some of the men that Mr. Gamble looks up to, and so y'all need to go out for. But we do have a few more questions before we start.
Okay.
Here's some times.
I want to show you my shirt.
Oh, I've already noticed that. I love that.
My son gave that to me a few years ago at Christmas. And I thought, where did you? I've never seen one like that. And he said, yeah, I got it online, yada, yada, yada. Well, my son was killed in an air crash. He was an Air Force pilot, and he was killed in an air crash a couple of years ago. And this is sort of my go-to shirt now. It was a huge tragedy, and I miss him every day.
We're all very sorry for your loss, and thank you not only for your service, but for your son's service to this nation. I'm very sorry.
Yeah.
So, GS was wanting to know, can you remember, or did you have a hardest target area that you inserted in?
Well, we got sent down to, where were we? Dock Toe, is that outside Placo? Yeah, we got sent down to Dock Toe because they didn't have a hatchet force. Well, it turns out they didn't have a mission either, but we got sent down there, and they decided they would put us in on Hotel 9. And a lot of guys that had been to Hotel 9, Hotel 9 was a son of a bitch. And anyway, we didn't know. Off we went. I think the first time I went, for some reason, I wound up on the second helicopter, and Sergeant Luttrell wound up on the first. And he said, sir, I'm not taking a radio. I've got a red grenade and a green grenade. When I get there, I'll pop a red grenade if the LZ's hot, and I'll pop a green grenade if the LZ's cold. I said, well, that's not the way we do business, but it's too late now. I said, all right, let's get going. So we went across Hotel 9, and it was a beautiful time of day, and the sun was reflecting off the river and sparkling, and it was nice. There was no evidence of anything, and we got closer to the to the LZ that had been announced by the captain at FOB1 over a hot mic, so that everybody who was on that channel could hear it. And we started getting a little ground fire. We had a gunship company with us, and they started working over the gunfire, and one of them got hit hard and crashed. And the other gunships, daisy chained around him to protect him until they could get picked up. In the meantime, we kept going in, and there was a bomb crater in the middle of the big field. Those of you who've been there probably know it. And the first King Bee landed, and everybody bailed out into the bomb crater. And from where I was, which is probably 300 or 400 feet up, I could see the bullets hitting. I mean, they were getting the shot out of them. And So I said, the pilot looked at me and said, what do you want to do? And I didn't see a red smoke grenade, and I didn't see a green smoke grenade. And I said, keep going. I'm not going to leave Luttrell down there with a couple of guys and no radio. So we got in there, and man, it sounded like a wasp nest. And the pilot put us down about 10 feet from the bomb crater. So it was a quick run into the bomb crater where Luttrell was. Every time we stuck our head up, we got a volume of gunfire that we didn't want. And I said, what happened to the red grenade? And he looked at me and said, I was busy. And we both gave these great big smiles that would whatever. And at any rate, we returned a little bit of fire, and we could do. This was a bizarre deal. I was only there 20 minutes. That's the shortest time I was ever anywhere. And shoot, I was going to say, Lucy Green gave me more time than 20 minutes, but at any rate, we're down there and we're saying, hey, we need a lot of support. And there was no air power scheduled other than helicopters, but planes started showing up. We declared a prairie fire emergency, and the first plane that showed up was a Navy A-1E, and his wingman had been shot down, and he had been shot up, and he was heading back to the carrier, but he peeled off, and there was a 37 millimeter, a big aircraft gun. I guess there were some in there on a ridge line. And he said, I'm going to try to get that 37. And so he went down after the 37. And I think he got it, but the 37 punched a couple of holes in him. And the last I saw of him, he was blowing smoke and headed east, headed west, headed east. And I'm thinking, we are in deep shit. There were about 10 or 12 of us, and we were definitely surrounded. It was, anyway, we got fighters in there, and we got the first set of jets came in, and they were F-4s, and apparently they'd been equipped with a new electronic bomb rack that had just come out, and the Air Force was complaining about it. And he came in and said, all right, everybody get down, lead's coming in. And I looked up, and a little speck in the sky, and he's losing altitude. And here he comes, and he's coming right for us. And I find out that he's got 6 500-pound bombs. He was scheduled for a different mission. He wasn't a close air support guy, but at any rate, he pushed the button and nothing happened. And he pulled off and he said, had a malfunction, I'm coming back around. I'm thinking, oh, great. And he came back around and he pushed the button, and all 6 bombs left the rack and they landed where they should have landed. There was just a hell of a lot more of them than I'd planned on. But it blew the shit out of the tree line. And then he said, I got problems. I got to go. And off he went with his wingman. And by then, some F-4s from the Air Force had showed up, and at least they had some, rockets and machine guns, and so they kept hosing the place where we were getting fire from. And Navy, suddenly a couple of Navy planes showed up, and they were going after that 37. So they were over on the ridge working the 37. I had the Air Force guys working my tree line, and guys are coming, and of course all the choppers had to go back and refuel, and here they come. And we bombed the piss out of that place. And the choppers came in, and I'm telling you, we were in and out of there within a minute and a half. And off we went. And, we all got home okay. And I'm trying to think. I think there were no casualties, oddly enough, because we were damn ass surrounded. When we pulled out and went over the trees, I looked at it the day before, and it was just dead leaves and jungle and stuff like that. I looked at it now, and there were trenches cut in the ground, and there were perches up in the tree, and they'd just been laying low, and they were ready. And that was the hardest one and the shortest one.
that, I mean, how strained, if it will not actually strained, but shortest and hardest. There you go. My fucking factor, like my shirt was increasing just listening when you tell me that.
Well, Hotel 9, for the guys that went to Hotel 9, they'll probably remember it much the way I do. I think it was an enemy R&R center or something, but there were always plenty of them.
As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, I'll have to check the old footage in the notes, but if I'm not mistaken, even Mr. Ed Wolkoff of CCC mentioned Hotel 9 and what a nasty area.
Yeah, you know, I think every FOB had that one place. We were Oscar 8. Oscar 8 was just horrible. And I think Hotel 9 was CCC's Oscar 8, and it was just horrible. And they probably had one like that down south too.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Here's one that Ronnie's curious about. How many tours did you have, and what year was it?
I had 2 tours. First was in 67, 68, and that was my tour with SOG. And then I went back in 69 and 70, and that was my tour with the 1st Division, which went home. And I got posted to Halnia Province as the operations advisor. I was so mad. And I went before my first wedding anniversary, and I came home, you know, just before Thanksgiving, I think, that year. But I had the 2 tours, and those were the years.
Like we've did our interviews here today. Just one quick question knocked out. First off, Mr. Gant, is there anything else you would like to add today or mention, speak on before we close out?
Okay. Good to talk to you guys. I hope I'll talk to you again soon, and I'll have to start listening to you.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to have you back on if you'd be willing to come back on for another part 2 or part 3.
Well, I'm just glad to be here.
Well, we're glad you spent the afternoon with us. It meant a lot. Matter of fact, everybody's already saying things and all that. I'll be passing on to you. But for you to exit, sir, I'll be closing it down. All you have to do is hit the little leave studio button, and you'll be good to go. So
I see you. I'll talk to you later.
Yes, sir. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, guys, we had a wonderful guest today, Mr. Gamble. It's an absolute, just a wonderful, wonderful guest. I've had my notes together. Actually, literally, the first time I spoke to Mr. Gamble, that was our first setting notes from July. First time I spoke. Well, reached out through Facebook, get some columns Facebook group, and hey there, here we are talking. But as you can see, it looks like you can join us for it is right. Good eye. I need to see my ear back there. I'll do a video about stuff. But y'all remember, this is a wonder. See, I've got all kinds of notes and bookmarks and everything. It is officially without the thanks and comment sections and all of that. It is 236 pages action packed book. It's literally from the day he graduated high school to the moment he stepped off the plane in America after his second tour. So it's and literally we landed and I made my way to the terminal and there was Dad, Mom, and my brothers. And that's the photo. So you get the entire span of Mr. Gamble's not only SOG career but his conventional, so to speak, career. It's a wonderful book. As I said, I'll put a show notes in the comment section, but I'll link it in the description so if anybody hasn't seen it or comes back to watch it, if you missed it, you can check it. And if you'd like to get it off Amazon, just check the show notes. But I yet again thank you guys. As I say every time, without y'all participating and asking all these great questions, none of this would be possible because no one wants to get on here and tell me these stories or tell stories to me for 100 million times. Although every once in a while we're getting new stuff out of it. So without y'all, this would not be possible. So yet again, thank y'all for all y'all do. Next week's going to be a big week. I hope y'all will be able to be around for all of them. If not, just catch them when y'all get time. But I'm gonna have a huge load of guests on for y'all next week. Big shout out to Jason Collins at Pucker Factor. He gifted me this shirt. This is a new line selling. We've got several colors out now, along with his books. And he's working on the new one right now that is going to be, from what I've gathered and seen thus far, it is going to be a keeper. Upwards of 200 pages. It's been rumored. So keep an eye on that. I'll keep y'all updated as I do with new SOG books and any SOG news I can talk. So you guys, yeah, Roddy, I know I've got odd hours, and that's one thing after this next week, I'll start getting a more regular schedule and getting better prepared. I just wanted to get everything out here for a lot of these guys. A lot of these guys aren't going to be around much longer, and while we've got them, I wanted to get them out to y'all while we could. So, but I'll here in the next week, 2 weeks, I'll have it more on a professional schedule, if you will, where it's not a day or two before to where y'all have short notice to catch the show. So I'm keeping that in mind, but I just wanted to get y'all some info out there as quick as I could with all of these guys that had already said they'd be willing to sit with. So thank y'all much. I'll end up doing a video or an Instagram here in the next probably later this afternoon or in the morning. Definitely in the morning because we're having our first Force Recon guest. So I will see y'all later. Thank y'all again and have a great afternoon, evening, or morning if y'all rewatch this. I'll see y'all later. Thank y'all.